You can start, Tony.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, wherever you're dialing in from or you're joining. It's indeed my pleasure on behalf of the Global Center on Adaptation, the GCA, to welcome everyone to this webinar on water in the State and Trends in Adaptation 2021 report, GCA's flagship report. This webinar is organized by the GCA's Water Adaptation Community, where GCA is building a community of practitioners, decision and policymakers around global and climate change adaptation. This is a platform where you are welcome to join. My name is Anthony Nyong, and I am the Director for Africa at the GCA, and I have the pleasure to be your host today. The purpose of this webinar is to share the technical content on the State and Trends on Adaptation reports. Specifically, it looks at the role that water plays in adaptation in Africa. Despite contributing very little to global greenhouse gas emissions, the African continent suffers the effects of climate change to a very disproportionate degree. As a result, increasing temperatures and sea levels, changing precipitation patterns, and more extreme weather threaten socioeconomic development in Africa. Ultimately, less water will be available for household use, industry, and agriculture. By the year 2050, about 500 million to about 3 billion additional people will be living with water stress, with serious implications for public health and economic growth. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, climate change could further lower gross domestic product, that's the GDP, by up to 3% by 2050. We must address these challenges with bold actions. And this webinar seeks to look closer at the strategies and points for action. I will share a brief overview of the program. First, we will hear the opening remarks from GCA's Chief Executive Officer, Professor Dr. Patrick Fekoin. Then we will have a presentation on the report by its co-directors, whom I will introduce very shortly. This will be followed by a discussion with some very special guests, and there is an opportunity for the audience to ask questions or contribute to the conversation. Please post your questions and comments in the comment field, and we will endeavor to collect and respond to all questions. We'll have a short presentation also by the AU NEPAD PIDA Water Community of Practice. Then, for those of you who are watching from West Africa, the video which we'll upload afterwards will have a French audio option. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Patrick Fekoin, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Center on Adaptation. In this role, Professor Fekoin works closely with Ban Ki-moon, architect of the Paris Agreement, as 8th Secretary General of the United Nations and as Chairman of the Board of GCA. Professor Fekoin has managed the Global Commission on Adaptation and chaired Global Commission on Adaptation chaired by Ban Ki-moon prior to this role. He was the World Bank Special Representative for Climate Change. Professor Fekoin holds a PhD in Sustainable Development Diplomacy from Wageningen University. He also holds an MPA from Harvard University and a master's degree in social and political philosophy from the University of Amsterdam. Professor Fekoin, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Tony, for your very generous introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, let me also add my voice in welcoming you to this very important water adaptation community webinar today, which indeed will focus on water challenges in Africa. I also would like to express my gratitude to the Netherlands government for supporting this broader work on the WAC, so to say. So why Africa? And as Tony, as you already alluded to, basically the climate emergency has Africa at the crossroads, right? Because business as usual is a surefire route to chaos. But adapt to it and Africa will thrive. We've all seen, obviously, the IPCC report last summer. We have learned about the life-threatening temperatures above 41 degrees Celsius that may increase by 140 days in some parts of Africa. We have learned, in essence, about the intensification of the water cycle. I mean, the river floods that will change from 1 in 100 years event to as frequent as 1 in 20 years events. These are the hard facts of climate change. But in our view, they do not fully capture the reality Africa faces. Let's go back to 2019. I'm sure we all have fresh in our memories the images of the strongest cyclones recorded in the Southern Hemisphere in Africa, Ida and Kenneth. We've all seen the destruction it left in that path, and where in Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe. The lives and livelihoods lost are part of the reality of Africa. But again, this is not the full story. For us at the Global Center of Adaptation, the GCA, the real story of climate change in Africa is the story of resilience, of responsibility, of solidarity, of, in fact, opportunities for a safer, greener, and more prosperous continent. It is this story, the solutions, the innovations, the hard facts of science, and the leadership of local communities, the need for coordinated action, and the urgent call for more financing. This is the story we tried to capture last October in the State and Trends on Adaptation Report, Focus on Africa. And it was launched by President Kenyatta in Kenya when we were in Nairobi in October, just before Glasgow. In essence, this State and Trends report it's the first time that a single report brings together all the evidence and adaptation solutions for the continent. The report, if you read the report, it has one simple overarching message, which is investing in climate adaptation. It makes economic sense. Every dollar, euro spent in enhancing resilience and climate adaptation, it yields between $2 and $24 or euros of economic benefits. In essence, it's in fact inaction, not action, that is expensive, as delaying action on climate adaptation will only increase cost. And as I'm sure you know, we as the GCA, we have been, in the last few years, a very strong advocate at the global arena for mobilizing finance and investments for adaptation. For example, in Glasgow last month, together with the UK COP presidency, we convened a ministerial dialogue on adaptation. And these 30 ministers, or 30 plus ministers from all regions in the world, they were challenged with the question, have we accelerated bold adaptation action for those living on the front lines or not? Also in Glasgow, now more specifically in Africa, we co-convened the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Summit. I mean, it was the first of its kind, together with President Tshisekedi, obviously president of DRC, but also the chairman of the African Union. We brought together dozens of leaders from Africa and beyond Africa to drive the so-called Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAP. The AAAP is the largest adaptation program in Africa to date. We have co-designed this with the African Development Bank. What is it? It's 25 billion over 5 years on 4 pillars: agriculture, infrastructure, youth entrepreneurship, and finance. And cross-cutting is this water agenda. Why is that so important? Because building water climate resilience, as you all know, has the potential to be the catalyst for a virtuous cycle of social environmental benefits, create jobs, formalize networks of cooperation, giving voice and agency to local communities. So for us at the GCA, this report, the State and Trends report last year in October on Africa, was not a one-off event. We will have a second edition on State and Trends on Africa in 2022. And why is that important? Because obviously COP27 hosted by Egypt, is the Africa Cup. So STA 2022 will form and deepen the analytical basis, which will then in turn inform the further work of the AAAP. And we're very keen to do this together with you as our partners and friends of GCA. I also, in closing, want to thank two particular individuals for the heavy lifting on STA 21, State and Trends Adaptation 21. One is Professor Jamal Saghir, and the other one is Dr. Ede Ijjasz. They were the co-directors of the report. They were the analytical and intellectual founding fathers of this report. I'm delighted they're with us here today to basically not only share the lessons of the report, but also explore with you how we can work together going forward. I also want to thank Joep Verhagen and Ase Johansson joining here today, leading the water team. And in closing, I want to thank all of you, not only joining this webinar, but working with us on this critical agenda. We need your partnership, we need your support, because I'm strongly convinced adaptation is the defining challenge of our generation. And water, as we'll hear today, will be at the heart of this. Because let us not forget, the COVID pandemic has been relentless. Its health and economic impacts have been devastating. We've all experiencing this on a daily basis. Only together, though, can we address the triple challenge of COVID, economic recovery, and climate adaptation in 2020. So I'm strongly convinced this is going to be hard, 2022, but hard is not impossible. Thank you very much, and I wish you again a very fruitful discussion today. Back to you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Fekwein, for those strong words. Like you've rightly said, adaptation is it. And for Africa, climate change is water. I have the pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, of introducing two very eminent persons. When I was asked to introduce them, I felt, what could I say about these guys who've been here and there, done it all? But these are the two co-directors of this seminar report for which we are here to discuss today. First, let me introduce Dr. Ede Ijjasz, who is a senior advisor to the GCA. Ede has had a very meritorious career spanning 23 years at the World Bank. He has served as Regional Director for Sustainable Development and Infrastructure for Africa and Latin America. He served as Global Senior Director for the Social, Urban, Rural, and Resilience Technical Practice and Manager of the China Sustainable Development and Infrastructure Program. During his career, he was responsible for a portfolio of about $80 billion of investments and close to 800 policy and advisory reports. He led a team of over 700 technical experts and more than 1,000 consultants deployed across the entire world. He's a non-resident fellow, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he's currently working on two books, Disruptive Technologies for Sustainable Development and Knowledge Management and Organizational Change, to be published by Routledge in the year 2022, just next year. Ede has a PhD in civil and environmental engineering with a specialization in hydrology and water resources from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So you can see he is very ably qualified to speak on this topic today. I also have the privilege of introducing Professor Jamal Saghir, who is also a senior advisor to the GCA. Professor Jamal Saghir is an economist, an expert in infrastructure, climate change, and international finance, with over 25 years of experience at the World Bank Group. From the year 2010 to 2016, he was Director of Sustainable Development and Senior Regional Advisor at the World Bank. He has held several directorships in Africa in agriculture and rural development, energy and infrastructure, environment, climate change, water, transport, and Sustainable Development. He's currently a professor of practice at the Institute for the Study of International Development at McGill University, Montreal, Canada. A distinguished fellow for economics and development at the American University of Beirut, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Penn Institute, Colorado School of Mines. He is on the board of several companies and institutions. He has contributed to the delivery of major reports to the UN Secretary General and the international community on energy and climate change. Mr. Saghir has contributed to over 60 publications, essays, and books, many of them on climate change and water. With this, you will agree with me that we have assembled two of the best to be able to address this very important topic. So you have the floor, Dr. Ede.
Tony, thank you very much. And why don't we start with the presentation so that we get into the substance of it. And while Asset that introduces, it is a great pleasure to be with all of you today. This is the first in a series of technical seminars that we're going to be talking about on different topics that cover the State and Trends in Adaptation 2021. Let me give you a little bit of an outline of what we are going to be talking today. Next slide. We want to give you a sense of what the State and Trends report cover. What are some of the present and projected climate risk in Africa? Jamal will be talking about the most critical sector for Africa today on climate sector, which is agriculture. We'll then move into floods. We'll discuss the time for integrated solutions and a little bit of conclusions from the report. Next slide. The State and Trends report is the second in the series. The first one that we prepared was global in nature, and the second one we said, let's focus on Africa. And this is the first time that a report does a very, very comprehensive overview of climate risk and, more importantly, adaptation solutions for the continent. So it is science-based, but it is also policy-focused and very solutions-oriented. Next, and it covers a broad range of topics. It goes all the way from macroeconomics to COVID recovery, what to do in finance and private sector. More importantly, how adaptation can be an integral part of the future of the youth and the jobs that Africa needs. We cover a variety of sectors from agriculture to drylands to transport and energy, urban and water, which is the topic today, and cross-cutting themes like health, gender, conflict and migration, and SDGs. So as you see, this 600-page report of socioeconomic factors in Africa and brings the process. Next, let me talk a little bit about the important Can we have the next slide, please? And let me talk a little bit about the important present and projected climate risk in Africa. And the IPCC report in 2020 is coming and saying that on the temperature, look, 1.5 degrees warming under basically all the scenarios is going to happen in the next decade. And unless strong action is taken by mid-century, we're going to have 2 degrees or more. And what is important in Africa is that 2 degrees, remember, is the average global increase. That means 3 or 4 degrees in certain parts of Africa. Days that are going to be above 35 degrees are going to increase between 20 and 160 days annually. And parts of Africa, if the world does not meet the Paris Agreement targets, are going to mean that life-threatening temperatures above 40 degrees centigrade are going to increase 10 to 140 degrees, depending on the scenario and the region, meaning that many parts of Africa will be unlivable. As a next. Let's continue then on the issues of precipitation and droughts. The frequency and intensity of heavy or high warming. In high warming scenario, a flood that we used to happen 1 every 100 years is going to happen in 1 in 20. The droughts, what is interesting is that the floods increase, but also the droughts increase. So the changes in total precipitation are small, but more intense and more short, heavy rainfall events are going to be having these very strong impacts on a variety of economic sectors in Africa. Sure, just to let you know, on water, Africa will have drier conditions over most of the continent, more droughts, but also more flooding. That's what makes it really complicated. As the next slide, please. And then the sea level rises are rising a little bit faster than the global average for Africa. And for a low warming scenario, you're going to have between 40 and 50 centimeters by 2100. And under high warming scenarios, close to a meter. And therefore, what is going to happen is that not only many of the coastal areas of Africa, and remember, a lot of population are in coastal areas of Africa, are going to be facing more frequent floods. And therefore, what used to be a current 1 in 100-year flood, it can become in 1 in 5 in these coastal areas due to the combined effect of increased sea level rise and increased flooding. So it's 5. So it is going to be a very, very different flooding situation for the coastal areas of Africa. As a next, and then Jamal, you can pick up on agriculture.
Many thanks, Ede. You have put nicely the framework of the discussion we had in the report. Before I zoom into the agriculture in Africa in particular, let me already give a preview on what does it mean, water adaptation. Water adaptation contributes to building resilience to the shocks and disturbance manifested through water quantity and quality variability. I can see 5 dimensions of water adaptation. Flood prevention, as you already talked about it, and we're going to discuss later on more. Mitigation and protection, response, recovery from more frequent and intensive flood event in urban and rural area due to the precipitation changes. Erosion protection in coastal area due to sea level increase in river basin due to change in the hydrological dynamic and the water cycles. Reliable water supply capability, climate-proof irrigation, water supply, wastewater service, and irrigation, and water for ecosystem that in turn provide ecosystem service for natural and human being. These 5 dimensions enable countries to design their infrastructure and policy incorporating future climate scenario, intending more frequent flood or water stress in all sectors would be affected as we go. In the agriculture sector in particular, if you look at that sector, food and nutrition security in Africa is simply off track. We already in the 80s and the 70s missed the green revolution. We are almost missing again the resilience of the sector. Right now, it is off track. In 2020, more than 1.5 people in Africa faced hunger, and more than double the proportion of hungry people in any region. Climate change is already stalling progress toward food security in Africa, interacting with multiple other stress and shocks, including inequality, conflict, migration, economic recession, and COVID-19 pandemic. This is all putting us situation there. If with the 3 Celsius the trajectory of climate, it will reduce their income of the poorest by 40%, by more than 8% by 2030. By 2050, an increase in undernourished people from 282 million people to 350 million people. It reduced 30% of the current growing area of maize and banana and 60% of beans by 2050. It could cause also 1/5 loss in West Africa maritime fishery, half of the fishery-related job, and around 300 million annual income across food system by 2050. This is what our report was able to find. Next slide, please. Now, if we go with a 1.5 Celsius trajectory, as Ede was saying at the beginning, it provides more option for adaptation to African food system, but still demand regional and national and local action. We cannot continue business as usual. It has to be much more because the food insecurity continue to increase by 5 to 20% with each flood or drought. Even you go with the 1.5 trajectory, every time we're going to have a shock, we're going to have an impact on food security, on the agriculture, and on the poor of Africa. Next slide. If we look now at the nexus between Africa, climate change, agriculture, and water, and later on we can also add actually the issue of energy, but these are the main areas we're discussing today. By 2050, the number of people who lack sufficient water for at least 1 month per year will soar to more than 5 billion from 3.6 billion today, causing unprecedented competition for water. This competition will turn into conflict, migration, tearing the already fabric of the society, especially in those poorest countries in Africa. We've seen already the tension around the Lake Chad, we've seen it in East Africa, we see it in the Central Africa, and we see as we go on, as the water stress will increase, we're gonna see more of this. Furthermore, some countries will continue to be further stressed by a heavy dependency on river basin control by upstream nation with unresolved water sharing issue. We hear always about the issue of Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt over the Blue Nile, or other countries, we've seen it in the world like Turkey, and that this kind of tension are going inter-region, intra-region, intra-country, and we need to watch them carefully because they will have an impact on agriculture and the people. Growing evidence of ongoing meteorological and hydrological change, as well as projection of substantial increase of such changes, shortly rendered the urgency of adaptation into water management unquestionable. Next slide, please. Since agriculture accounts for the highest percentage of total water withdrawal in Africa, up to 81%, in sub-Saharan Africa, the rainfall agriculture accounts for 95% of the region. More than 1.1 billion people are at risk due to water constraint. This is the sector which creates jobs. This is a sector where rural development is happening. And if we don't invest and we don't make it invest in an efficient irrigation system and agribusiness and specific seed adapted to climate change, we might lose another opportunity to see the continent developing aggressively. Only 3% of the cropland in sub-Saharan Africa is irrigated. 3%. This is less than Mexico, which has 5% of the cropland irrigated land. So imagine when we compare a continent with a country, one is 5% irrigated land and one is only 3%. Irrigation infrastructure could be expanded up to 38 million hectares compared to this current 7 million. And therefore, it's very important that we are moving to much more aggressive irrigation infrastructure, but it has to be capturing the issue of adaptation as well. Next slide, please. Now, when we look in terms of what we talk about adaptation, it is very interesting, this slide that gives you the poorly rained versus the fully irrigated, where you see where the importance of agricultural water management along the spectrum of what could be done, from drainage to surface water irrigation, to groundwater irrigation, to water harvesting. But what I want to add to that slide is that water adaptation exists already. We've seen it in water collection, where we've seen expansion of reservoir, pump station, water reuse, household farm treatment, water reclamation. It exists in wastewater collection network, where we use raw water supply, pumped marine outfall, construction of wastewater treatment. In sanitation, we are seeing now Africa moving in that direction, composting of bio-waste, aerobic digestion of sewage sludge, rain, and we've seen it also in the water harvesting, where we've seen rainwater harvesting from the roof, increasing water availability and efficiency of use. This has to go as much more quicker. It has to be speed up. This has to be leveraged to do much more with the investment that will be put in this sector. This is crucial for Africa. This is a crucial agriculture sector, especially crucial for climate and crucial for protecting the poor. Ede, back to you.
Thank you.
Sorry, there's one more slide. Maybe you can do it.
You have one more slide, absolutely.
I can do it. No, this slide is also important. Basically, we don't have any choice. Adaptation, as our CEO said earlier, is not simply a choice. It's a must. It's not, we don't have any more options here. We need to do it. But financial adaptation to climate change will be more effective than frequent disaster relief. And that's what we want our government to understand, that finance adaptation, put the right down payment now, because the effect on the long term will be beneficial for you. If you look at the annual agricultural adaptation cost, which is $15 billion, less than 1% of the GDP, the cost of inaction or business as usual could be 12% of GDP. In other words, invest now. It's better than you pay the cost later on. And we look at the research extension, water management infrastructure. If you look at what it means to be done and how the cost of action as proportion of cost of inaction, infrastructure and market access, which is important for rural development, for economic growth, is around 60%. Thank you. Eddie?
And we're going to be talking now a little bit about floods. And so let me wait for the next slide. So look, what is interesting about floods is that the floods have accounted for 65% of the events and about 25% of the deaths. What is is that when you look globally, in areas with high flood risk, and 132 million of them are poor. What is interesting in sub-Saharan Africa is that the region has 10% of the total population that is exposed to high risk, but more than half of the global poor who face high flood risk. So sub-Saharan Africa has not only very combined issue of flood risks with poverty. Next slide. And this happens not only at national level, but also at subnational level. According to the World Bank, when you combine the district level information on poverty and the district level information on floods, turns out that poor people are often overexposed to floods for a variety of reasons. For example, in Western Africa, the countries that had the large rivers and delta areas tend to have poor people located there, and therefore they are disproportionately exposed to floods. In urban areas, then the poor people that migrate into urban areas tend to be in low-income communities that have higher exposure to floods. So overall, 73% of the analyzed people in sub-Saharan Africa live with a positive bias of exposure of the poor to fluvial floods. And this is an important message that we want to have in the report. Floods are not neutral. Floods affect the poor disproportionately more in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide. And therefore, we discussed in the report a variety of policy options. And I think that one of the big challenges in Africa is the lack of data to understand the flood risks. And not flood risks only from the hydrological and climatological perspective, but also on the population and the economic risks that are there. You cannot have risk in neutral perspective. You need to combine the hydrological with the economical and the people perspective. Now, what is important is that traditional structural flood reduction infrastructure is expensive. You cannot really put everything and choose that we're going to protect through concrete. And therefore, you need to start with what is the lowest cost and most effective. And the lowest cost and most effective is really planning and preparedness, getting ready for those floods. And the next level is to handle land use planning and management, making sure that people don't live in the highest flooding risk areas. But they cannot do that if they don't have the information. Now, the rapid changes in Africa, both from the population perspective, the urbanization perspective, from the climate perspective, make flood prediction really complicated. Now, what another important message we're bringing in the report is that it is important for Africa to look at nature-based solutions that are smartly defined to be able to let the rivers breathe, live with the floods in a way that are more manageable. Because again, building flood risk prevention infrastructure is just simply too expensive at the current moment. And there are measures that can save lives. There are measures that can save the economic impact of floods. Next slide, please. Important message is that what we see not only in Africa, but in many other regions of the world, is that the three important areas of work, the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, the Disaster Risk Reduction and the Sendai Framework, led by UNDDR, and the Climate Change Adaptation and the UNFCCC, sometimes actually have a lot of overlap. You cannot reach the Sustainable Development Goals with a clear focus on adaptation. The progress on the SDGs, as we show in the report for Africa, is like 2 steps forward, 1 step backward after climate-related disasters. The disaster risk reduction focus on the disasters of today is an important step, but needs to also take into consideration that climate is changing. So you need to be ready for the disasters of today, but also the disasters of tomorrow. And therefore, another message from the report is that really the way to reduce vulnerability, to enhance resilience and adaptation, is to look at these 3 frameworks in a combined manner, to make sure that the institutions, especially ministries of planning, ministries of finance, really take a comprehensive view and don't have separate ministries doing that. Don't have planning doing sustainable development goals, environment doing climate adaptation, a different ministry in infrastructure, or civil defense doing disaster risk reduction. That combination is fundamental. Next slide, please. And the final really important message that we want to give to you is that it is time to start merging disaster risk response and integrated water resources management. These 2 communities have worked for many years in parallel tracks, and they have so much to leverage each other in practical ways, where the disaster risk management focuses on the rapid response, the search and rescue, the reconstruction, the early warning systems to be able to prevent disasters. And then from the higher level, integrated water resources is all about land and water use, spatial planning, and infrastructure. It is time for these 2 disciplines to come together, to start looking at different spatial scales, different temporal scales, and to make sure that these institutions work and coordinate with each other. It is time to work in a more coordinated manner. Africa cannot afford to have different planning processes for integrated water resources management and different planning processes for disaster risk management. Next slide. This is particularly important because Africa, remember, has 90% of its waters in transboundary basins. And therefore, if you just look at national solutions, then you're missing the opportunity of collaboration and coordination across boundaries. The climate adaptation options will be more limited if they only look at national boundaries. And therefore, if countries coming together in regional cooperation, you have more options. You expand the range of possibilities for climate adaptation. And it can start as simple as data sharing, all the way to more complicated joint implementation of large multi-purpose solutions on landscape management that need to be done in a coordinated manner. Next slide. And therefore, some of the practical solutions that have emerged in transboundary cooperation, Asim, can I have the next slide, please, are really looking at how can you really begin institutional sharing of information, sharing planning tools, having institutions that allow to align the regional and the national policies, how to share approaches to infrastructure that bring together the natural-based solutions and the built multi-purpose dam infrastructure, and also how to pull together the limited technical capacity that different countries have and how to bring together the mobilization of financial resources. Adaptation and transboundary cooperation go hand in hand. Jamal, next slide.
Sorry, I was muted. Many thanks, Ede, for providing us the deep framework and at the same time providing us the lesson learned from transboundary cooperation climate adaptation. In conclusion, what we believe in this report made it very clear is that priority action for African government to enable adaptation, water management, and food system encompasses both policy intervention and public financial investment. It's not about sequencing anymore. It's what you have to go in parallel if you want to speed up and be able to adapt. For the policy intervention, the financial costs are relatively low, but the political effort and political will at the national, local, municipal, and regional level is essential and needed. IWRM, DRR, and climate adaptation need common approaches. This report made it very clear. Those three practices cannot continue to going in parallel, developing their own toolkit, developing their own strategy. And we've seen it too many of them, and they are sometimes complementary, but sometimes they're contradictory. It's time to look at common approaches, to look at the same angle. And actually, like one of the questions that was asked, and I tried to respond quickly, we need also some prerequisite to be done on the water supply, or the issue of reform and accounted for water pricing, all of this, the toolkit that we used to do in the 90s to 2000, this has to continue. What we are adding here in this report is that while we do the basic, we need to adapt and move to the next level quickly so that we don't lose opportunity what we have done at the basic. There is sound evidence base from which to build a business case for climate finance and private finance. There is a lot of interest in funding adaptation solution because they bring innovation, they bring technology, they bring know-how. There is substantial practice experience to draw on implementation from Africa and globally. South-South is moving very quickly. North-South is important. And also, I've seen a lot of regional experience that could be also going within the countries, within the local side. So 5 key areas of investment: research and extension of the service. This is important. Water management. Climate resilient infrastructure has to become part of the business. Sustainable land management, and climate information service and data, which will allow us to be looking at the future in a much more brighter way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. You could quit the share screen mode here. Thank you very much, Ede and Jamal. That was really, really very thought-provoking. And we have seen several questions already coming. So please, if you've not posted your question or if it has not been responded to, please do so. And we will take you on. But in the meantime, let me invite Joep. Joep Verhagen is the GCA lead on water. What is your take on this? Because this is a very comprehensive report. How is this influencing what you are doing at the Global Center on Adaptation? Joep?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. And thank you very much, Ede and Jamal, for this very comprehensive and excellent presentation. What we take away is that for us, water is at the heart of climate change adaptation. But as the presentation shows, water is also at the heart of the SDGs, and the world is not on track to achieve the SDGs related to water. Climate change is further compounding our challenge to deal with this. What is needed is a massive investment, and it's very clear that we are not putting enough money into water adaptation. We are not putting enough money in attaining the water SDGs. Apart from the finance, and Jamal was alluding to it, what is needed is an integrated approach. Water adaptation needs to be mainstreamed at the national level. We cannot deal with water for people, water for the economy, or water for nature, and water for food separately. We need to bring these policies together. We cannot talk about droughts without thinking about floods. What Jamal and the presentation clearly made clear, disaster risk reduction, integrated water resource management, climate adaptation need to be brought together in one policy. What is needed to track this improved and more integrated policies will also help countries to attract investments into the water sector. Improved governance, improved water governance is essential as well. It's cheap, it costs less, but it's hard, and it will require a political will and massive support from all of us. Many countries in Africa are making steps. There are countries moving and trying to bring together DRR and integrated water resource management. There are efforts to better manage water across boundaries, but we need to move faster and we need to move better to really meet the challenge of adapting to a different climate and making sure that we are having a more resilient world tomorrow. What we do at GCA, to give you an example, one of the things that we do, we have the City Adaptation Accelerator, where we help cities to mainstream water in their effort to build resilient cities for the future. We help cities to understand climate risks. We support together with them, we strategize, prioritize, and plan for resilience building. We build their capacities, and together with key institutions such as the AFTB and the World Bank, we make sure that the plans actually get financed on the ground so that cities become more resilient, more sustainable for all. Tony, I'll leave it there because there are many questions and there are many people who want to contribute, but thanks again for this opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you so very much, Joep. This report, as we can see, has very practical leaning. It's not just a report on the shelf, it's really informing the way in which we deliver at the GCA. And I'm also very certain the way that others are going to be delivering this. Let me quickly introduce a very notable colleague who is going to join us here and give us her perspective. Please allow me to introduce Mrs. Portia Segomelo, who is the manager of the Program for Support in Transboundary Management of the Kavango River Basin.
Anthony, sorry to interrupt you. She can't join us, unfortunately, because the electricity is down. So she has had to cancel. Oh, she was online, but electricity, yeah. So that was the reality. It's raining too much. So it's an illustration maybe of the challenges to also use all the services because of the climate.
That's good to know because I saw her online. And again, this is about water. We either have too much and we struggle, or we have too little and we struggle. And we have too much, there's floods, causes a lot of havoc, puts our infrastructure to sleep. So I'm glad these issues have come up. But let me also, somebody raised an issue that we have not dealt so extensively with the frequency of cyclones that we're going to be having. At the beginning, the CEO, Professor Fekoin, mentioned the two biggest cyclones that we've received in Southern Africa, Hurricane Ede and Hurricane Kenneth. Are more of those expected? What should we be thinking about? So that's the question to you, Ede and Jamal. I don't know which of you would want to take that up.
Ede, go ahead.
So Tony, what the report says, and actually what the report says and what the IPCC report also, the projections indicate potentially frequency, but greater intensity of those cyclones and the tremendous damage that they can cause. Measures that we mentioned on disaster management are particularly important disasters altogether, but let's remember that there are thousands of disasters at the local level in Africa, make the news as cyclones and are equally destructive of lives and livelihoods throughout the continent. Back to you, Tony.
Okay, thank you very much. Ase, this question comes to you. You basically coordinate the water adaptation communities. And this is a series of seminars you will be leading. Why water? And what are you seeing thus far in the communities of practice that you're already leading?
Yes, thank you, Tony. Well, talking as a facilitator for the water adaptation community, I think that water has always been hidden in a way from the agenda because we take it for granted. So what the water we don't see that runs through the plants and is in the atmosphere. So I think it's very important to stress all the different aspects of water, not just the water we see as water supply in the tap and so on, but water is everywhere. It's used for everything. So it really demands, I think what is important in relation to the communities, the work is to really the importance of collaboration. So I think understanding each other's views and having being able to share perceptions in a safe space, your experience, your knowledge, and to be to learn from each other, to really put ourselves in each other's shoes, and to maybe learn together and move forward from there. So it's not only about sitting around in the same room and talking. We really have to get into the conversation and really raise some critical questions and really move forward together. So look for answers together and to see how can we change the governance, the financial mechanisms, the organizational structures, to the policies. These things are not easy questions, but really demands that we sit together. So I think we really need, for the water's sake, we really need to find ways of collaborating and learning better together. So this is what we try to promote in the water adaptation communities, and try to understand, bring in different stakeholders and views in there to have a conversation. So you're all welcome. Thank you.
Now let me add something here, maybe Tony, if you allow me to ask. First of all, water for adaptation, it was renewable energy, is for mitigation. If you compare these two aspects, the renewable energy has been doing a breakthrough in terms of technology, in terms of moving in low carbon, in terms of substituting fossil fuel. The water sector for adaptation has to go through much more aggressive technology breakthrough, much more prevention side, much more reform, and to be more attractive also for investment from the private sector. This sector has never been really attractive by the private sector. Rate of return of any investment of utility was always less than 12%, where energy was around 20%, the telecom 25%. We need to put that sector, as you put it, at the middle of the adaptation story. Because if we miss it, the impact it will have on irrigation, agriculture, and food security, on environmental feasibility, on anything else will be huge. And therefore, the importance of this water practice to put now the emphasis and move from the traditional water issue of a human right, which are important, but they have been repeated too many times. Physical water reform, corporatization, transboundary issue, or groundwater management, to make it much more integrated and make it the adaptation at the game in town in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal, because you've just raised a very important issue. Why do we look at water as a resource, as a social service that must be provided to everyone? That's the angle at which we're coming in. So I think that drives down investments in that sector. What typically, being around this, you've led major initiatives on this, Jamal, what one key recommendation can you make that will allow governments, particularly our governments in Africa, to realize that water as a resource, could attract investors and investments, or on the other hand, if it's not properly harnessed and channeled, could also lead to a very significant drop in all economic indices? What major...
We need to convince Minister of Finance of Africa that investing in water is a good thing and has an impact on economic growth and job creation and poverty reduction. This battle we have been carrying out for the last 20 years. We have not yet succeeded to give any Minister of Water or Climate Water a good seat on the table in Council of Ministers. Only few countries listen carefully to what Minister of Water will tell them in terms of economic return of good investment in water in the past. And now with adaptation, the message is it's good to invest in water because it could have a long-term impact on economic growth, especially in terms of investment in the food security business. That message is not yet completely understood. And our colleague later on, probably from the different practices from the water governance, Dr. Alex Simalabui probably will confirm that from his experience at the Nepal. So the water sector has to become a focus of attention of Minister of Finance. That's my priority here. And if we get there, we'll be able to move the agenda much more aggressively than we have seen in the past. And therefore, adaptation is a good entry point because there is a cost right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to introduce a very dear colleague of mine, Mr. Alex Simalabui, who is the Executive Secretary of the Global Water Partnership, Southern Africa, and head of the Global Water Partnership Coordination Unit. He is also the Global Water Partnership's global lead on climate change and the global coordinator of the Water, Climate Change, and Development Program at the Global Water Partnership headquarters. He co-chaired the World Bank Expert Group for Climate Resilience and developed, and led a program for investments, preparation, water security, and climate resilience development across 60 countries spanning 4 continents: Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Mr. Simalabui has advised more than 20 countries and governments on the integration of water into economic development. He's a lead author of Water Security for Development in Africa. He led the development of the African Union Strategic Framework for Water Security and Climate Resilient Development. He holds a postgraduate qualification in business, that's a master's in business administration, civil engineering, and a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. So, Alex, you are working on another community of practice, but this time it looks at transboundary water governance and international water law. Can you tell us what is driving this, why it was set up, and how you believe that this can also create a niche and help address the issues that we've talked about today? So Alex, over to you. You have the floor. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can. I can hear you now. I don't know about the others.
Thank you. And can you see my slide?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you, GCA, for inviting me and the Global Water Partnership to contribute to this very exciting webinar, basically reflecting on the State of Trends report. And I think just to also mention that, and agree with my colleague Job, who I'm working very closely with on water in Africa, that indeed water is the center of adaptation. Basically, that's how we see it. And I think we've seen the presentations from the experts, including Jamal, how floods and droughts have been making a mess of Africa's hydrology and, of course, extension to Africa's economy as a whole. So the community of trust I'm going to talk about is really part of what's called the Africa Water Investment Program, officially the Continental Africa Water Investment Program. Very ambitious program whose goal is to mobilize at least 30 billion by 2030 and to help to generate 5 million jobs. It's a very, very advanced program in terms of its main ambition. And really this program is an official program of the African Union. It was adopted by the AU heads of states in February 2021 this year. And it was also endorsed by the Governing Council of the African Ministers Council on Water, AMCO. The Africa Water Investment Program was originally an idea of the United Nations and World Bank High-Level Panel on Water, which was convened by President of the World Bank and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who is actually currently chair of the GCA. So in its final report released in 2018, the high-level panel recommended for the launch of an Africa Water Investment Program to accelerate the transformation required to mobilize investments for water, sanitation in Africa, and also address the increasing risk of climate change. Its objective is to simply transform the investment outlook for water security, mobilize high-level investments, I think as Professor Jamal has mentioned, that are required, like we have seen in other sectors like education, health, energy, which unfortunately has not been the case for Africa. Investments in Africa have been lagging behind. Objective is to promote job creation, putting jobs, economic growth at the center of water management and water investments, with water being a means to an end and not just water management or water supply and sanitation for its own sake, but really putting water at the center of economic growth and job creation. So the AIP basically has been conceived and adopted by African Union by heads of states to respond to one problem, to narrow the water investment gap on the continent. According to African Development Bank, the investments required to achieve Africa's vision for water security is about 64 billion per year. But actual investments are only between 10 and 19, leaving a significant, massive water investment gap, estimated at 45 to 54 billion a year, which is required to be mobilized. So the question is, how do we narrow this investment gap? Because as long as the finance is not flowing, plans and policies can be there, but implementation will always be lagging behind. So the AIP tries to respond to this single problem of trying to mobilize large investments for water management, water and sanitation, environmental management, nature-based solutions, and infrastructure to narrow this water investment gap. How is the AIP addressing this? Firstly, it's by mobilizing a high-level political commitment. And again, I go back to what Jamal has said. Water is too complicated to be left to the bureaucrats like me. It's very complicated at a transboundary level. It's very complicated because Africa shares over 64 river basins. So you need political discussions at a very high level, and the heads of states have to be engaged. There's not going to be any major investments in water. There can never be any big investments on water without the involvement of heads of states. So as a result, the AIP will try and mobilize and is working very actively on this to establish an international high-level panel on water investments for Africa, comprised of representatives of nominated heads of states from Africa, as well as leaders from the international community, with the objective of mobilizing a high-level political commitment and following up on commitments that are made on mobilizing finance and investments for Africa. And secondly, development of an AI water investment scorecard to track progress in the mobilization of investments, and also putting in place mechanisms to mobilize blended finance and leveraging the private sector, because the private sector has been a bystander in water for a variety of risks that are involved. So we need to have measures that can de-risk the barriers and the risks that constrain the private sector from investments in water by having mechanisms for establishing blended finance facilities. And of course, strengthen the enabling environment, the business case for water and investment climate at the national level is very, very important, as well as addressing the bottlenecks of project preparation that constrain the preparation of bankable projects, as well as making sure that climate resilience, gender transformation, gender empowerment, social inclusion is at the center of investments in water when they are prepared. So we have mobilized and we're working actively with a number of partners towards what one might call a community of practice on water investments in Africa. Over 23 global and Pan-African institutions are working together since May. You can see some of the organizations that are here, including the Global Center for Adaptation and many others, but overall over 23 partners currently. have officially joined the Africa Water Investment Program and are working together in trying to find ways on how to narrow the water investment gap by first of all developing what is called a water investment scorecard. So these 23 organizations chaired by the African Union Development Agency and also supported by the African Ministers Council on Water, with also leadership and guidance from the African Development Bank, including the World Bank and the OECD, are working actively to develop a tracking tool to support the Continental Africa Water Investment Program. It will be presented to the heads of state on a regular basis to ensure accountability. It will set benchmarks to assist countries to track progress in understanding the national water investment gap and where action is required. And it will display country-level performance against high-level priority thematic indicators that are being developed by the partners. And also it's being developed, as I mentioned, to enhance mutual accountability so that when commitments are made, accountability can be followed. It will support countries to track progress, identify bottlenecks, and mobilize action to narrow the water investment gap, and make a political case at the highest level, heads of states, ministers of water, ministers of finance, and heads of state on what needs to be done to mobilize these investments, including mobilizing support from the private sector. This is what it looks like. So the three pillars of the framework has just recently been approved by the steering committee that is leading this work, which is co-chaired by His Excellency Ibrahim Mayaki, former Prime Minister of Niger and current Chief Executive Officer of the African Union Development Agency, as well as His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete, the former President of Tanzania. They are co-chairing the steering group for the development of the scorecard, and recently they have just approved the three pillars of this water investment scorecard. One, enabling environment for water investments, strengthening the enabling environment, very, very important, including improving the investment risks, reducing market risks and regulatory risks, and ensuring social and gender inclusion and environmental inclusion in the design of investments. Secondly, mobilizing accelerated investments from government, public expenditure, from the treasury, from ODA, as well as private sector, including philanthropic foundation, philanthropic investments. And finally, the third pillar is about enhancing investment performance and sustainability. We don't need white elephants. We have many dams that have been installed but are not working properly. Many water supply systems that have been installed but not working properly. Many boreholes that have been drilled but they dry up. So we need to enhance the performance of water supply, sanitation, and water resources investments by making sure that we're able to follow up in terms of asset maintenance, operational maintenance, enhancing climate resilience, and making sure that the economic impact of water is also tracked, including the risks. So this is what the community of practice is working on, led by the African Union Development Agency. And just to highlight some of the investments being considered, 23 high-level transboundary programs on water and energy across Africa. These have already been approved by the heads of states. So the water investment scorecard is going to be tracking the progress in the development of these large-scale as well as small-scale investments, including nature-based solutions and ecosystems. The program has already started. 5 countries are working on this: Tunis, Benin, Cameroon, Uganda, Tanzania, and 5 river basins: Zambezi Basin, Lake Victoria, Lake Chad, and Volta Basin. So I thank you, Professor Tong, for giving me the opportunity. And just to say thank you very much also to the GCA for the great that we're doing, and we're looking forward to working very closely with you on the Africa Water Investment Program. And thank you, Job, for your active participation in the community of practice of the AIP Water Investment Scorecard, where you're actively involved representing GCA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was really, really very forward-leaning and thought-provoking. And it's very comforting to know that there's something happening at that level, because like you've rightly said, if there isn't that political support, that leadership, then it becomes a struggle. In September, when we held the GCF Friends of the AAAP and Adaptation, we know that President Kikwete was there and you accompanied him. And he really laid out his passion, why he believes this is the way to go. And it tallies exactly with what we're doing generally on adaptation, because prior to this time, hardly would you have resilience or adaptation take center stage at an event like COP. But global attention is being drawn to it. And I like the fact that global attention is also being drawn to the issues of water as an adaptation necessity for Africa. So let me turn back to you, Ede. You've listened to Alex. You've seen what they are doing. What is your take on this?
Thank you, Tony. And Alex, thank you for that great presentation. I think that the AIP and the initiatives that the Africa Union and EPAD are undertaking are fundamental to really improve the management of water in this process. I think that in the end, these solutions are an integral part of strengthening the adaptation and resilience of Africa to climate change. Our recommendations in the book and with many of the partners that contribute are threefold. First, many of the may not always think about how important climate change is going to be in the future, but these structures are going to be there for 20, 50, 70 years, which is exactly the period where a lot of the impacts of climate change will happen. And therefore, designing all of these projects, therefore, many of these projects need to start looking at how to work together with nature to preserve and to be resilient. I agree fully is that the problem cannot be solved without serious transboundary cooperation as you're working on.
Hello?
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, we lost you once. Okay, so thank you very much for that. A lot of Africa's river basins are shared river basins with potentials for lots of conflict, like Jamal had mentioned at the beginning. I see this AIP as an instrument, a vehicle that could, at that level, diffuse some of the potential conflicts that might be coming up in the management of shared river basins. Jamal, any thoughts on this?
First of all, I would like to thank the participant. I have been watching carefully all the Q&A and I'm trying as much as possible to answer. I think one important message that Kamal Jimawi from Algeria is putting here in the chat is basically how realistic in your proposal, recommendation, and conclusion to be implemented. In addition, also to the comment, which was why Africa are not being involved. So let me try also to answer publicly this. This report is done with many Africans. This report reflects Africa. This is not a report written by people. This is people who knows Africa, who work with Africa, who has been many years between the co-director, you have at least 50 years of Africa. So we are not trying to come with ideas that are not reflected the content, and especially all the consulting we got from the university, the case studies. So Kamal, it's important that you understand that part, because one of the think is important for us at GCA is that we want to be hearing the continent and helping the continent deeply. Then the question about, and that come back to what you're saying, Tony, how realistic is to implement the recommendation conclusion? Actually, we are recommending, we are already working. We are working in the Sahel, we are working in the Horn of Africa with the African Development Bank, and some of the recommendation on the agriculture side in particular, about what kind of water adaptation. So we are moving, and the whole idea is to go from the theory to a solution broker. That's what GCA, that's the only organization which is solution broker. The incentive is all about delivery on the ground. However, delivering on the ground is also understanding what's happening on the ground. Therefore, the question that you, Tony, ask is important for us. If you don't understand the transboundary issues and the political economy related to water, or the issue of irrigation, agriculture, nexus, and the issue of food security, we will not be able to advise properly. Then we become like anybody else coming with top-down solutions that can be fabricated somewhere. I think what we are trying to do under the leadership of Tony, especially in Africa, who is really in the middle of the continent, is to provide something which is feasible, acceptable. That's why some of the recommendations you will see could be very simple coming from that report. Some of them will require simply political will. Alex was very clear. If we don't get head of state, prime minister, and minister of finance to take care and be focused on adaptation in water, it's complete loss of time. I think it's time to get this clear in our, it's not a technical issue. I was last week in Ephemerar on technical issue on the water for the MENA region. It's very interesting. All the technical, bright people of the region are all putting their act together. I haven't heard a political economy or political message that will force change on the attitude of how much funding we will put in the region. So that's an important aspect for you, Tony, that you, as we conclude this comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal. And Alex, thanks once again. Like you said, most of the things we can do look difficult, but like the CEO said, difficult is not impossible. When we came back from COP21 and everyone has submitted their nationally determined contributions, and basically what I saw at the African level was we need about $3 trillion by 2030 to implement the nationally determined contributions. And that made it look like we are a sunk cost. And nothing was happening with the African Development Bank. But when we changed the narrative that there is a market, there is an opportunity worth $3 trillion by 2030, because most of those things that would be implemented through the NDCs will not be done by government. Government will just create the enabling environment and allow those who want to do it to come in. We started seeing people approach us, approach the bank, impact investors, they want to be a part of this because of just changing that narrative. So I believe that there are things that can be done, simple things like changing the narrative and seeing that there is good investment opportunities. The State and Trends has actually shown the positive cost benefits of investing even in water, investing in agriculture, investing in irrigation, investing in climate information services. So if there is that positive cost benefit ratios in favor of resilience, then I think we need to promote it. And I believe we need to push for it because a lot of the private sector operators are not aware. And that's one of the beauties of the State and Trends report, that it provides information on these benefits that you won't readily find anywhere else. I think in the absence of any other words, except maybe Jamal, you have a closing word, then Ede, you have a closing word. Take home. None? Ede, any closing remark? Take home.
Jamal, you go first.
Maybe. First of all, I would like to thank you, Tony. Thank you, I say, for a fantastic really gathering this morning. I would like to thank the Dutch government. I know it's very important for the Dutch government to have this kind of debate, this kind of alternative community. I participate in many meetings, and I do hope we are responding to this kind to bring people together from around the continent on different issues and go deep into it. And I do hope we'll have more of these kind of discussion. I hope in the future we're going to have discussion on subsectors to go deep into some deep dive and learn from all your comments and get your advice on how we can do a better job for Africa and for the people of Africa in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ede.
Thank you. No, and also thank you, Tony, of course, for the fantastic moderation. And also thanks to the water adaptation community. These platforms for sharing knowledge and for having spaces for continuous discussion that goes beyond the event are really important for the global adaptation community. We encourage you to take a look at the water chapter and other chapters of State and Trends in Adaptation, and we look forward to engaging in different ways. Please stay tuned for technical discussions of other chapters that you water and sanitation to finance to deeper engagements with SDGs and the like. So thank you, Tony, so much again for all.
Okay, thank you very much, Ede and Jamal, for the brilliant presentation. We've heard a lot. We've seen the role and the importance that water plays in adaptation and how we ourselves should adapt. Like the CEO normally says, adapt and thrive, or stay where you are and die. And we know that we can't afford to do that. We really don't have an option. Water is very important. Water is critical to Africa's economy. And the more we keep looking at it as a global public good that is free, then I think it makes it very difficult for us to really appreciate the need to take care and safeguard our water resources. My take home is investing in adaptation in the water sector is smart economics. The positive rates of return would encourage the private sector. How can the public sector create the enabling opportunity for that to happen? And I'm glad that the community of practice being put together by the AUDA and the Global Water Partnership will specifically address these issues. And I look forward to seeing a closer collaboration. We've started already working together. There is no need to keep working in silos anymore. Nobody plans in the dark anymore. The State and Trends has put things on the table that opportunities that are in one place are brought to the fore, and that others could also see if it worked in that community, then it can also work in this other community. I want to specifically thank the CEO for driving this agenda, making it happen. I want to thank the team, particularly Ase, for organizing this webinar. It hasn't been easy bringing in all the people that have tuned into it, you and the entire team. So thank you so very much. And we look forward to having another session very soon. God bless and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Organizing. Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you.
Jamal. Thanks, Ade.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.